A critical clue has been found in the Air India 171 accident that killed nearly 300 people. It has been almost a month since the accident, and we're finally getting a hint as to what could have happened. Hey everyone, Meet Kevin here. I am a licensed jet pilot, and we've been covering the Air India story. We just now have information out from sources familiar with the investigation that is about to be released, with a critical detail of what may have gone wrong in the Air India 171 crash. Now keep in mind, everybody's been captivated by this news because we're worried, oh my gosh, do we need to be nervous about planes just falling out of the sky on takeoff? This is really weird, it's nerve-wracking, this is scary, is it safe to fly? And mind you, while in America we have over 45,000 deaths a year from car travel, we have fewer than 350 per year aviation deaths, which means basically all US deaths almost occurred for an entire year in that one accident, of course, in India. It's scary. It shows the immensity, an entire year's worth of a country's deaths all compressed into one accident, essentially. It's scary. So it's made a lot of us nervous about what could have gone wrong. We've speculated that, well, we've seen the Ram air turbine deployed. Maybe this was because of some kind of catastrophic electrical failure, but planes don't lose thrust because of a catastrophic electric failure. Did some kind of catastrophic electric-related failure lead to a dual FADEC reversion in the engines, leading to a loss of thrust? Boy, that's a crazy lineup of the Swiss cheese that just seems like a very weird alignment of events. Or is it possible that something else went wrong with the engines, like fuel contamination, vapor lock? Well, we didn't hear. It's very rare for jets to have a vapor lock issue. It's usually something you consider in pistons, can happen in jets. And fuel contamination, no other aircraft had fuel issues that day. Now, while regulators did go investigate Air India after the accident and issue citations for things that they could do better along with other airlines, this is the same routine thing that happens in the United States. After something goes wrong or there's a report or something, investigators come in and issue citations because that's how we show that they're doing their job. Well, it turns out that now there is a new update. Air India 171-787 MAX 8 crash caused by, quote, fuel switch mistake? This is not something that is usually a mistake. Let's read and then I'll add. Investigators are looking into the deadly June 12th crash of Air India 171 and have begun focusing on a potentially crucial element: the aircraft's engine control fuel switches. According to multiple media reports citing aviation sources, the switches, which regulate flow to each engine, are now at the center of the inquiry into what caused the Boeing 787 Dreamliner to plummet seconds after takeoff. The report by Air Current, so this is re-reported from the original report from Air Current, an aviation-focused publication, cites multiple individuals familiar with the ongoing investigation, so they could be wrong. We don't actually have the official release yet, right? But they are suggesting that analysis of the aircraft's black box data has pointed to a possible movement of the switches. What? Wait a second. If these fuel control switches were in the off position, the aircraft would have lost engine power during taxi. You wouldn't have even been able to complete the run-up process for turning your engines on, because on Boeings, you turn the engines on. Once you get to about 25%, you throw those fuel switches on. Every aircraft obviously a little bit different, but generally these switches are going to be in the on position. If you turn them off during taxi, the engines are going to shut down. If you turn them off before takeoff, not only are you going to get errors and CAS messages on your primary and multifunction displays, but you're not going to take off. Anyone who's in a pilot seat, either left or right, is going to command an aborted takeoff. So it is unlikely these switches were in the inappropriate position because A, we wouldn't have made it from the gate to the runway, certainly wouldn't have been able to take off with these in the off position. So that means if these switches did indeed get switched off, we then wonder, were these switches accidentally switched off? Were they bumped off? Well, in order to understand a little bit about these switches, which you can see graphically right here, fuel control, you have two settings, run or cut off. Well, they look like normal little switches. You could just accidentally brush your hand over and switch off, right? Wrong. Because the aircraft that I fly has exactly the same style of switches. We actually use the switches for our ignitions, not for our for fuel cutoff. We have fuel flow switches in a different location. But when we look at in the similar location, we look at our ignition switches. We have the same sort of knobs. And the way these work is once they're in the on or auto position, you can't push them down. So if a child walks up and tries to push them down, or somebody drops something on them or tries to push them down, they won't go down. In order for you to push them down, you actually have to pull them out, and then they release past a little metal barricade that prevents them from going down. So you have to lift them up, and then you can click them down to the down position, which makes the accidental shutoff of these switches extremely unlikely. They are also, for example, in our aircraft, nowhere near or even similar in style to the flap handle. This is not a switch that you would ever in training go to during a flight. This is not a switch that you accidentally, oh, I meant to reach the flaps and I happened to cut off both fuel switches. No, no, no. Because even if you accidentally cut off one of the switches, you would have a single engine failure and you should have still been able to fly. Now, we would have likely seen some adverse yaw, although Boeings have some pretty good adverse yaw prevention in the event of a single engine failure. Likely you're still going to see something, some evidence that you have thrust in one engine. And pilots all of the time are trained to deal with this. You're gonna pitch for V2, some like to say, or your single engine rate of climb. Some just level off to the horizon, wait until they get coordinated with their rudder to make sure they don't stall out the plane, and then get to their climb again. There are many different strategies for what to do in an engine failure, but this is something that pilots train all of the time. So even if one of them were inadvertently shut off or intentionally shut off, the second one, or the second engine, since these control fuel flow to each independent engine, left switch, left engine, right switch, right engine, you would not have this dual engine failure and this aircraft accident. So this then begs the question, why would somebody turn both of these switches off? If indeed it is true that both of these switches were turned off, it means after the aircraft rotated. So in other words, after our takeoff, we're up in the air. At that moment, somebody made the decision to turn both of those switches off, which you would never, ever do in flight unless an emergency procedure called for it. Certainly unlikely during takeoff there would ever be a reason for that. And usually, you only turn these off when you actually get to engine shutdown and you're parked at your gate and you're ready to turn the plane off. So, what could have happened is that on takeoff, the pilot in command, now this is my speculation, okay? Whoever, we don't necessarily know who was flying the aircraft, left seat or right seat. Usually what happens is the left seat flies the plane as the captain, and the right seat ends up operating flaps and radios, and generally you'll see a rotation. So you'll actually see them switch seats. So it could have been the first officer who was flying this time, or it could have been the primary pilot in command who was flying. We don't exactly know. Either way, somebody would have been in control of rotating this aircraft. Now, just so you can see what I'm referring to, here's a video that I posted called Dangerous Jet Landing, Phenom 300E, Worst Turbulence Yet. And this is actually the takeoff portion of the video, which I put towards the end because it was less eventful. But what I want you to do is I want you to see the takeoff, and I want you to see that when we call V1 and rotate, I will actually move my hand from the thrust lever, from that center console where those fuel switches are, and I will move both my hands to the yoke, which Boeings use yokes as well, and I will rotate by pulling with both hands back on that yoke, which means my hands are not at the center console and I'm focused on taking off, which does afford an opportunity for when we call for flaps to go up, the non-flying pilot to have their hands in that center console, manipulate the flap switches, but potentially also shut off those fuel valves in a malicious act, which is a form of terrorism. That could be consistent with having enough thrust to take off, then all of a sudden almost simultaneously losing fuel to both engines. Here again, a normal takeoff.
Regard.
Power
Okay,
set.
brakes off.
Alright, there's speed allowed 3 ways.
70.
Check.
See that helicopter coming over? That's what I was worried about.
Hey, V1, rotate. The helicopter's no factor. V2.
Positive
Go,
rate.
both hands
Positive
on.
right.
You're up.
Go.
We got that helicopter in sight, no factor. I'm going to start turning left though.
Helicopter 605 north, back with the option report on the go east
Roger that.
Okay, flap up.
So there's obviously a lot to do here, and I'm flying in this example here in a single pilot configuration where you actually see that I'm operating the gear, I'm operating the flaps. Typically, in a dual pilot Boeing setting, you would have one person who's not on the yoke operating the flaps and the gear. They would be operating those after the pilot in command calls for it. So this is scary because it suggests terrorism is a potential option here. I don't see how this could be a quote-unquote mistake because you can't take off in this configuration. You just wouldn't have the fuel. Your engines would just shut down. You'd shut down on the runway. So it had to have happened after takeoff. It remains unclear whether the controls were shifted intentionally, mistakenly, or as a result of a malfunction. It seems unlikely that the switches could be moved as a malfunction or as a mistake. And then both of them. It's not like these switches just break, and even if they did break, both of them, very odd. Each of the two engines has a switch with 2 positions, run and cutoff. Shifting the switch to cutoff while airborne would immediately shut down fuel to that engine. It'd still run for a few seconds, it takes a little bit of time. But once that line is clear, yes, you would lose thrust and disable the generators that supply electricity in much of the plane's systems. That's why that ram air turbine would deploy. You just can't bump them and expect them to move. The switches are used during ground operations, during starting or shut off. Exactly. Adding to the intrigue is any lack of any formal safety communication from Boeing or GE. Since the initial black box data was examined by Indian authorities June 25th, aviation experts say this silence may indicate that a mechanical fault is not the leading theory behind the crash. Right, they're basically saying, hey, Boeing or GE didn't publish any kind of urgent recalls, right? This is scary because it does mean that it is possible that this was terrorism, which is, again, comforting for all other planes, but also gives me a lack of faith in just humanity in general that somebody would choose to do this, if indeed that's what it turns out happened here.
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes.
Congratulations, man. You have done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Paffrath there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your take.